Chair, the meeting is now live.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Joint Audit Committee. Very pleased to see everyone here. We have just one apology from Mr. Jardine, the Chief Executive of the PCC, and one new member to welcome, or new attendee to welcome, our new Deputy Chief Constable, Mr. Green. Very good to have you with us. We have found the attendance of the Deputy Chief Constable extremely useful over the past few years. So we hope it will continue to be so, and that you will find our thoughts helpful to you as well. One or two people are sitting in slightly different positions to normal because they're in slightly different roles just at the moment. So it feels very odd to have Lynn sitting directly on my left hand. I think everyone is familiar with the acting up arrangements that are happening. Okay, so does anyone need to make a declaration of interest in any item that is on the agenda? No, good. We have the minutes of the meeting that was held on the 30th of March. Are all members happy that they are a correct record? Thank you. Yes, I'm getting nods all round. Are there any matters arising that anyone thinks we should be picking up? We haven't identified any directly. No. So if we're all happy, we'll agree those minutes and move on directly to item 5, which is the risk management update for both the force and the OPCC. Who wants to start, Lynn?
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you.
Okay, so same as usual, the risk register for the OPCC is based on both the statutory functions and any topical risks that we have, which is based on the delivery of the police and crime plan. I think this quarter there has been some movement across the scores compared to the previous quarter where all the scores were static. So we've seen 1 risk increase and 3 have reduced in score. I think the main one of concern is the risk associated with the resources not being sufficient to deliver the police and crime plan. And this is, I think it'll be a short-term increase. We're being really cautious with this one at the moment. There's a lot of things in play, and for those members of the committee that weren't at board on Tuesday, it largely linked to financial resources. So if we could just highlight some of the things that are in play relating to this. We're currently awaiting the case settlements to be announced, but we can see how pay increases are working out in the national arena. We've currently budgeted for around 3%. If it's more than that, it really puts pressure on our budgets. We're still seeing high inflation for longer periods than we anticipated. We've got minimal scope to increase funding coming in because the funding formula is really outdated, and the consultation on a new funding formula has been delayed, and we've got no timescales as to when we're going to see that. We have had a history of short-term grants. That's getting a little bit better, but we are still seeing some short-term grant funding. And I think added to all of that, we've recently received funding relating to the Uplift programme, and it's about maintaining that so we can continue to secure that funding. So I think there's a lot of things that go into that risk that we felt it was just giving us a little bit more uncertainty than we've had previously. It might be short-term if the case settlements come out over the summer, we'll know where we are with those. But on the other hand, you know, we're really good at managing budgets, and we'll make changes if we need to. So we felt for the short term we'd increase that risk to keep closer scrutiny over that. In terms of the 3 risks that have reduced, we've got risk number 1 about securing an efficient and effective police service. I think that increased slightly because we've had fairly new changes to the command team, and we wanted to embed the governance arrangements. We think that's happened now. We think the governance arrangements between the PCC and Chief Constable are bedded in and giving us the stronger governance that we need. There's weekly meetings between the PCC and Chief Constable happening where the Chief Constable is held to account on things like performance, risk, HMIC inspections. So that's started to work really well. And also linked to that, we've got, and it's linked to one of the topical risks actually around accessing police services and doing deep dives into some of those areas, and force contacts really improved in their performance. So I think the topical risk around accessing police services will actually fall out next quarter. We're just maintaining to see whether that performance is sustainable. And there's two risks relating to holding West Midlands Police to account and contribution towards national and international policing capabilities. Both of those are really related to governance arrangements, which again have improved and are much stronger. So we felt the scores on those could reduce. I think in terms of the topical risk, they've largely stayed the same. I've just talked about force contact improvement, which will potentially allow us to remove the access to police services topical risk. The only other change has been around vulnerability themes. There was a specific topical risk around RASA. We've just widened that a little bit to include all the vulnerability. Members will be familiar with the reports that have been received over the last year or so around vulnerability themes, so we've just increased the scope of that risk area. That's my update.
Okay, thank you. Do any members have any queries on that, Richard?
Yeah, thank you. On the financial position that you outlined, what's the worst case scenario?
Pete might be able to comment a little bit more on this. We did actually, the position was really good in 22-23, so we came back from a forecast 5 million overspend to 11.1 million underspend, and that was through strong budget management, through efficiency reviews, holding back on staff vacancies, which I know this committee has discussed on several occasions. Whether that's sustainable longer term, I don't know. We've got a balanced budget for this year. It's the future years that I think that we're going to really struggle. And we are reliant on that funding formula to be reviewed, because there's nowhere we can really go with precept.
So I'll let Pete come in a moment, but there is a distinction between having really sound financial management, which means you live within your means, and having sufficient funds to provide an adequate police service. And the two are not the same thing. So although we can make the budget balance, and you're very good at doing that, that wouldn't to me suggest that you can reduce the risk in terms of having sufficient funds, because you referred to the RASO and vulnerabilities audits. The underlying issue in most of those audits was that there are not sufficient officers available to do the work that is coming in.
In terms of some of those areas, the PCC has submitted a special grant bid to government, so we are continuing to lobby on those themes. I think it was a £9 million bid, which we're waiting to see the outcome of. So we are putting the pressure on government around those themes.
So Pete,
yes. So firstly, really helpful discussion and very relevant. So just from an assurance perspective, as far as the current year is concerned, we do have a planned balanced budget for the current year. We are very clear on the resources that are available to us. We've been very grateful for the Commissioner maximising the precept. And we'll continue to kind of keep a very close eye. We are holding a number of police staff vacancies vacant throughout the course of the year to enable us to look at our structures going forwards, to create a kind of a continued sustainable approach. The real challenge I think that we'll be facing is as we move into 24-25. But that is very much for us to look at how we do have that balance of resources across the force, how much actually we're maintaining from a police officer perspective, and the position on police staff, and indeed our third party spend. So we'll continue to keep this under review. It's very difficult at this stage to say what would the worst case scenario be for 24-25. We've done quite a bit of kind of sensitivity analysis within the medium term financial plan already, and we'll continue to keep that under review. I think the really important thing is that we do build on that track record. We're quite well placed as well, so the work that's underway nationally on the formula grant review, we have representation through myself on the technical reference group. We only had a meeting yesterday afternoon, all afternoon, with the Home Office on that, in which kind of clearly from my perspective was making representations, from a kind of a metaphors perspective, and kind of discussions around how the grant kind of would look as we go forwards. That's going to be really important, as well will be the comparative position on our precept funding. Because we're in that very kind of unique position where we have a high reliance on the government grant, about 80% compared to 20%, and we have the lowest tax base amongst the lowest tax base in the country. So we kind of, when we're squeezed on either side, we tend to be a loser both ways. So the importance of that future funding arrangement is really important to WMP, but we are doing all we can from a representation perspective, membership of the key working groups nationally, to enable us to do that.
Anyone else want to come in, or Richard want to come back?
No, I think we're back into that kind of problem which we've discussed in this committee lots of times about lots of pots of money are short term. So you never get the opportunity to kind of think along wider time horizons. Because by the time you've set up, delivered and then scaled down, the thing only lives for 12 months in reality, and then you've kind of got to descale it. And to know, and that kind of jars against the whole medium-term financial plan ethos. Sorry, I was reassured by the word sensitivity analysis, because obviously if you're modelling different outcomes, I'm more comforted by that, if not comforted by the general financial climate that you're in. So.
Sure. Thank you, and we'll very happily share as we develop that sensitivity analysis and update it as we go forward. Very happy to share that work with the committee.
Thank you, Pete. Anyone else? If not, then we can move on to the force risk register. So, going to go to Fiona.
Morning everyone. So just a bit of a summary update from the last board. So there's been two new corporate risks that have been added since last meeting. There's currently no critical risks to the force, which has been positive. There's no risk scores that have increased during the last quarter, and one score's reduced. 8 have just remained static, and we have had quite a lot of movement with 3 risks having gone through the last cycle of governance boards to be closed off, and 3 of them that are due to go for closure or reduction onto departmental risks over the next quarter. So just in terms of some of the detail then, so the 2 new corporate risks that have been added, one of them relates to the officer and staff right to work checks. I think there's been a question from committee in relation to that. The numbers at the moment, so we've had data from the vetting system that would suggest there are a number that are subject to further checks. That work is ongoing, so hopefully at the next committee we should be able to provide a further update in terms of what that means and the current position for it. But at the moment all of that work is currently being done and worked through, and that is currently a high risk while that work's done. The second new risk relates to the mental health detentions. Again, I think there's been a question raised just in terms of this. I suppose to give some reassurance to committee, it's not a unique problem to WMP, it's a national problem that has got national working groups on it, it's got ministerial support for it, and all of that is being worked through. The reason it's come onto the corporate risk register now, I think, is a sign of where we are with talking about risk in the force, where actually through those discussions, through the attendance at governance boards, some of these new risks are coming onto the register. But again, it's a national problem. There's local work ongoing for it as well. And again, we'll be able to provide further updates as that work goes through. Just in terms of the reduced risks then, so we've had one of the risks on there for a little while in terms of the operational resilience unit and the staffing within that team, and the knock-on effect that might have in terms of the capabilities for testing and exercising that we need to be able to do. That risk is now reduced. We've had staff recruited onto the team. Once they're in post, trained up and ready to go, that will be under constant review and again provide a closure or movement of the risk register. I don't intend to, unless there's any direct questions, go through any of the risk updates that are provided for the current risks. And the detail is on there as well in terms of the risks that are waiting removal onto the risk registers. So again, we've talked about the Connect briefing system. That's now in practice. There's been a couple of iterations of it, and there's really positive feedback from the workforce in terms of the support that that's given ahead of deployments moving forward. And the 3 risks that are being de-escalated just due to the mitigations that are in place. There's no further work that can be done or needs to be done for them. So the details on the paper, I don't intend to go into any of the detail on them unless.
Okay, Lupinder?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, obviously I just want to go down to the officer and staff right to work checks. Really uncomfortable reading. I didn't believe it at first when I read it. I thought this can't be right. I mean, we're looking at possibly just under 700 existing officers and staff. We shouldn't be in this position as an organisation. We've heard so many stories in the media about the Met and about their going through their recruitment process again and vetting people, any criminal records. And I'm sure this question was asked at one of the board meetings, and here we are. We shouldn't be in this position, you know. I find that really hard. I don't blame anybody ticking a box, because many people will probably do that thinking, yeah, of course I've got the right to work here. But this is down to this organisation to check that. 700, how many more are to come? How many more people have got a record, a criminal record, a possible criminal record that will slip through the system? That's uncomfortable reading. And the second point I'd like to raise is the mental health detentions. Again, why is this organisation in this position? Why is it high? It shouldn't be. It really shouldn't be. You know, detention times are expiring before transfer to healthcare. What's the reason behind that? Is it lack of staff? Why is the organisation in that position? Thank you, Chair.
Should we take one at a time?
Absolutely.
So I think Kath has got a question as well on the vetting.
Sure.
Or to pick it up, and then I think Scott wants to come in. So take Kath's question first.
So just to kind of broaden out the issue around the 700 and the right to work, I'd be interested to know how many of those are new recruits, and if there's an issue around some gap in the recruitment questioning, whether that can be filled. And for the 700 individuals, or technically the 700 individuals, has there any thought been given now to the implications for those individuals if they've been in service for a long time? If they are new recruits, for both sets of people, there's an issue around integrity or potentially an issue around integrity. What does that mean for them remaining in the force? And if they are new recruits, what does it mean for the uplift and the issues around funding that comes into the force for the uplift funding? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll answer them both in that order. So firstly, for the right to work, this is not a vetting issue. So we need to split the two things. This is not about vetting status. This is about whether the individual has a national insurance number and therefore the right to work in the UK. So they're two very, very different things. So we need to be clear that this is not about individual vetting status. It's simply about the right to work where people are either born outside of the UK or have got dual nationality. And for reasons that I'm not so clear on, the force has not had a process in place for that. It's identified it, it's recorded it as a risk, and it's now working through that. So there may be, at the end of that, there may be some integrity issues where somebody has either not disclosed something they should have done, but it's probably the case that actually we work through it, most of those people will have the right to work. Where they don't exist, then we will identify a process to go through it. So we need to be clear about that. That's not a vetting. The second thing, that the mental health update is nothing to do with West Midlands Police. Okay, so we need to be clear. It's right to record it as a high risk issue because we are keeping people in custody unlawfully. But it is not an issue for West Midlands Police. So it will be a high risk for all the time that I'm here. It will be a high risk on time gone from policing because there are insufficient secure mental health beds in the United Kingdom. So when we take somebody into police detention, either for a criminal matter or not, and they are subject of a section, at the end of their time in police custody based on the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, if it is deemed that that individual needs section of the Mental Health Act, then they need to go to a secure mental health facility. If there isn't one available, then we, as an organisation, the same as all police forces in the country, are faced with a choice. Those two choices are either we release them straight to the community, or we keep them unlawfully in custody. So this is an issue that service has been wrestling with for a long time. So the first person making that decision is the custody sergeant. So our sergeants are deciding, should I keep this individual unlawfully in custody until a mental health bed is found by mental health providers, or should I release them? In my view, they're making the right decision, which is the risk either to the individual or public is too great, so I'll keep them in custody. There is an escalation process which is nationally agreed, which it then goes to a member of the superintendent ranks because of their responsibilities in law under the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. They have had national legal advice on it, so they will write up their rationale, and on every single occasion it is then escalated to a chief officer so that we are aware and we accept that risk on behalf of the public. So the two things that are important, we acknowledge that it is not lawful, and we acknowledge that we are keeping people against their will without a power to do so in terms of a police station. It is high risk, it's high risk because we're breaking the law. That's why it's high risk. But faced with the choice of the risk to the public versus doing what is the right thing, that's why we choose to do it. So it's not an issue for West Midlands Police. It's a national issue we can't fix. But what's important is to be transparent about it. We record it because we accept the risk. It will be high risk and it will always remain as high risk until we have hundreds of secure mental health beds across the country that we can easily transport people.
Did you want to do?
Yeah, I think that's really helpful, thank you. I think just on that, what you're describing to me are inherent risks that you can't do anything about. It's just the environment you work in. So maybe I've done a create extra work, although I probably will with this comment. Presentationally, I think obviously that's the risk management, but you can't manage that risk, you've just got to live with it, so it's inherent. Similarly, I think there's a similar risk about the criminal justice backlog. Yes. Again, that's not within your gift to kind of pull the levers to make that better. So I think there might almost need to be a separate part of the report that says, contextually and environmentally, we live in this world, but we can't do stuff about it. Because I think when I read it, I'm kind of thinking, well, that's the risk. So what are you doing about it? And actually, you've helped me describe it. You can't do anything about it.
Absolutely, and I think that's one of the things that we've worked through in being able to. It's a new risk that's gone on there. What we want to be able to do is write down the evidence so that we're clear that that's the decision that's been made, the supporting evidence with it. So we've got that we can go back to. So that's being worked through, and we can, put that to one side, if you like, while all of that work is ongoing. Because as you say, we can't change it, and there's nothing else within our gift to do with it at the moment. So absolutely, it's likely that won't be on there next time, because of that work. Just one other thing, if I can, just in relation to the right to work checks as well. It's not, that risk is not necessarily saying that they have never been checked. What it's saying is that we don't have evidence that we have checked it. So it's not saying that it was never done throughout the process. The work is to check that we've done all of those checks and we've implemented that new system to make sure that it is recorded and we do have the evidence moving forward. So I suppose it's just to give the reassurance. We're not saying we've got 700 that have never been checked. What we're saying is we can't provide the evidence that we have.
Yeah. And Fiona, what's the timescales for that? When do you think you'll be able to bring that to a conclusion?
So we should be able to provide an update for you ahead of the next JAC. We should be in a position where we can provide that update. They're all being worked through as we speak, in amongst the other vetting that's been done for the organisation. So by the next JAC, we should have an update for you.
Okay. If it's much earlier, so it would be quite helpful, I think, if committee members could just be sent an email giving them an update, because it will relieve, if as you say, you find that actually 650 have got right to be here, it's far less of a risk. So if we know in advance, and just to support what you said about the number of beds. I mean, in my tenure as chair of the Mental Health Trust in Birmingham and Solihull, we opened an entirely new secure facility with over 70 beds, and there's still not enough. And the demand goes up And whatever the government's building programmes for hospitals, there's nothing in there for mental health at all. So, you know, it's going to remain an incredibly tight situation. And there are people at the other end, there are people in prison who need to be in mental health facilities who were in prison because they can't be moved back out. So it's in both directions. Is everyone then happy on those 2 points? Kath?
And are we, the associated report with that is the register, the actual
Yes.
table.
Yes,
Are we doing
yes.
that next?
Well, I was taking it, as it were,
Is it-
alongside, but so
okay.
there's something else you want
Yeah.
to take there, Kath?
Just a question about Connect.
Yes.
So clearly there's still ongoing issues around Connect, and it gives the impression it's going to be used as an audit and storage tool, because the briefing tool isn't working. I'm not sure who I'm. Is it you, Fiona, that last? Yeah. So and whether that audit and storage is just for the briefing bit of it, and it means that all the other component parts of Connect are working as they should do, apart from the legacy data. So it indicates there that there is data that can't be drawn across into Connect, and there's a specific mention of domestic abuse data, and that not being accessible in Connect, but is it still accessible in the legacy system, and can officers still check it?
Is this in relation to risk number 4? Legacy and backlog conversion.
Number 4 and 45. So it's page 2 is 45.
Yeah, so 45, that's the one that I described that's been removed from the corporate risk register because of that briefing gap is in place. There's iterations that keep on being released for it that will be linked in to Connect to update it without the manual bits of it. But for now, it's serving the purpose, it's auditable. The officers have got what they need to be going out and being fully briefed ahead of their duties. So 45 is that's in place, and just further releases will enhance what the officers get and reduce any of the manual work.
But thankfully that's through the IT department coming up with a solution to it. Yeah.
Thank you. So Catherine, just to provide that assurance that is very much down to the good offices of our IT team, finding solutions to ensure that any gaps that we do have within our current systems that are provided, we can do that wherever possible. We'll continue to do that, and kind of don't apologise for that whilst we're continuing to review the performance of the existing system. That is something that we will continue to keep under very close monitoring. That system is due for a fairly major upgrade. We're reviewing the position on that upgrade and the risks associated. Again, you know, I'm really happy to bring a further update to the committee as the position develops. It's absolutely something that we expect all of our suppliers to providing core systems to give us the tools that our officers need. Yeah. We shouldn't necessarily have to provide separate apps that our IT team develop. However, we will do that if we want to give our officers the best tools. So we will work on this, and we'll continue to keep you briefed as well, as we go forward.
And then the other one was 04, which is at the top of page 4 maybe.
Yeah, so that's a closed risk. So that was closed back in August last year with the work that's done, the rationales included on the table in terms of the work that's done.
I think my concern there was just a question about whether those DA records are still available to officers, even though they haven't been transferred across to Connect.
Yeah, so none of the legacy data is going to be deleted or the system's deleted until everything was migrated across that needed to be. That was part of the structures that were in place.
So maybe we could just get some confidence that where records then, I can see it's closed, but really it's just understanding that those records, even if you couldn't do it then, that they can or have been brought forward. Because for those individuals subject to those DI records, obviously they carry the risk, not WMP.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Chair, I'll happily take an action to provide a bit of a written update on that.
Yeah, that'd be
Hopefully that will help.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Finger?
Chair, if I may, just want to go back to 8.26, workforce representation. We've got a medium risk, and it says failure to attract, recruit and retain a diverse representative workforce. Again, this seems to be just reoccurring all the time. Can we get any information in this next meeting that we're going to have, audit meeting, in the recruitment drive? Where are we actually going? Where are we targeting? What areas are we targeting? Are we going to festivals? Or how are we recruiting to hit these magic targets?
Yeah, we can bring
Yeah, Chair, I'll very happily temporarily have HR in my portfolio at the moment, and we're looking, actually, one of the things that I've discussed with the leadership team very recently is just the approach we take to that recruitment, where rather than look at the more traditional routes of recruitment fairs and so on, where are we looking to go out and meet with the community at set piece events and so on, even at times when we're policing an event operationally, and maybe an opportunity for our recruitment team to also be alongside to do that. So we're absolutely looking at alternative methods as well.
If we can have that in a bit more detail in the next audit meeting.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. Richard?
Just kind of an overarching question, really. My reading of the paper was it's kind of steady state. There's lots of risks that haven't changed. But I'm aware that there's lots of change and lots of kind of organisation and new operating model. So lots of organisational change, but the risk information is telling me it's steady, which kind of I have difficulty reconciling. I just wonder, does that feel right to people with a view on this? And we did touch briefly at the last meeting about greater visibility of stuff around change projects, which wasn't coming through in the information. So I just wanted to add that comment in as well.
And at that meeting, we were advised we would see the highlights of the project's risk register, which we haven't got today. So it would be very helpful if that could be shared with us. So that we could, I mean, it may be that as you set out on these things, there are risks that you can see could come, and you're now 6 months in, and so it could be that you already know that some of those risks have been dealt with. It would be, I think, in the interest of openness, it would be very helpful for us to just be able to see what you were anticipating might go wrong, and how things are going compared to that.
Yeah, I can circulate that
Okay.
offline, and I think the reassurance that we are transferring risks from project into BAU as and when they need to be transferred across if they've not been sufficiently mitigated. So absolutely, the ones that we forecasted, we can share those.
Yes.
Just to respond, Chair, in relation to that Rod's point. As the person who now chairs the risk board, I do think that some of our approach needs a slight refresh. So it's one of the things that I'm doing at the moment. So the risk that we've discussed today regarding the mental health availability events, I think that's on right, Fiona. That was the one that was recorded as critical on the risk register. So I've intervened to say it isn't, because it is high, because it's important, but it's not critical. So we are working through a risk appetite ambition at the moment, and we're also working through a risk appetite statement. So I should probably share with the board, because it's useful information, that in a former life I was a non-exec director at an NHS foundation trust, and so chaired an audit committee there, so I bring a bit of knowledge outside of policing to it. So I think our approach needs a bit of maturing. The journey that I want us to go on is that we absolutely nail a risk appetite statement for the force tied to its objectives. Once we've done that, I'm confident that that's in place, that we then move into each of the individual departments having their own. So I think that's a route I want us to go on. In relation to how does it feel, though, my own view is the risks would have been greater if we were in the old operating model. So I'm not being critical of those that went before us, but neither Nine or the Chief would have designed the old operating model. The current operating model, which is tied to local communities, tied to the metropolitan councils across the West Midlands, with geographical ownership, is a much more effective way of doing it. And we shouldn't be surprised that in almost all of the metrics, whether that's the number of arrests, outcomes for the public, the speed to answer the call, RASO outcomes in particular, are all on an upward trajectory. So it does feel that the organisation is quite stable, albeit it's been through a bit of a change. In relation to the change programme that's now underway, then we'll give that undertaking that so I now chair the change board for the force, and we will bring the associated risks from the change projects that we've got ongoing back to this committee for a discussion.
That's very helpful.
Thank you.
I think we're all pleased to hear you say that actually you're also doing the work on risk appetite. That's something where actually, as an audit committee, we were challenged during our external evaluation of what's our input, or in terms of that thinking. And I think it would be very helpful. Actually, I mean, either for the next committee, or if you think it would be more appropriate in a more informal setting, for a session with the members of this committee to just talk through what the thinking is, and to give us an opportunity to see what your thinking is. That would be very helpful. So either at the committee or as an offline session.
Yeah. So we'll work through the timelines of it, because there's a few things that we need to align internally.
Yes.
So whether it's ready for the next one or the one after. But
Yes. During the course of the next 6 months.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
That would be very helpful. Thank you. Okay. Everyone happy then on the risk papers? And thank you to everyone for their formulation. They are very full, very carefully done, I know. That then brings us on to item 6, which is the update on His Majesty's Inspectorate. There was one paper somewhere that was still saying Her Majesty's Inspectorate. I can't remember where it was now. I did just spot it. It's still slipping through sometimes. Okay, Rachel.
Morning, Madam Chairman, every member of the committee. So the update in terms of where we are from HMIC is that it's been a really comprehensively busy period of activity for us. We're working through the field inspection plan at the moment, and are now working through a timetable of focus groups and interviews with individual strategic leads throughout the organisation ahead of the field work taking place on the 11th of September. And within the appeal process, we've had some specific inspections which form evidence of appeal, including answers to question 7, which is how good is the force at managing offensive suspects. That area is now been completed, and we're awaiting the hot debrief on it. There's been a separate inspection of stop and search, which has been completed using body-worn video to review against recording. And then the victim service assessment has been completed, which is essentially a review of 3 months of data looking end to end around the processes from call to investigation and completion. And that's three or four different issues specifically, but really across the board, there are 9 different crime types that look centred in stalking, harassment, burglary, residential, and other crime types. But that's now complete, and the HMIC team will process their findings at the moment and have a report in due course. In addition to that, HMIC have also launched a wellbeing and retention survey, which also covers performance. That goes out to all officers across the force and is completely independent of us. So we will have findings through appeal. So we encourage everyone to participate in that survey. And then moving forward in terms of readiness for appeal, we've already held self-assessment processes for different departments to look at where they are in terms of their journey and progress. We've gone back and supported departments to reconsider and look at their accounts again where we felt there were areas for improvement, and that's an ongoing process that will continue, not just through appeal, but will continue in terms of departmental development. Looking in terms of recommendations and the causes of concern and areas of improvement, there have been a number of national thematic reports published since then. Obviously, we've documented the levels so that people can familiarise themselves with where we are. There are 81 reports outstanding for the West Midlands with 85 recommendations. This is an ever-changing number, and in terms of our MSGs, we're seeing footing at the moment. We've created an internal audit process to how we address those recommendations and how we share those out to the organisation or through the governance boards to make sure people are being allocated the correct owners to a recommendation and then tracking that progress through. At the time of writing, there were several recommendations that were to go to Mr. Green for his consideration. Some of those have come back for further work because it is an ongoing auditable process. We need to be completely assured that they are up to closure before they're submitted. In terms of national published reports and recommendations, there have been several reports. The first from March is an inspection on how well the police are tackling serious youth violence. And for this inspection, we were an on-site evidence gathering force. The report talked about how the serious violence strategy, which looks at knife crime, gun crime, homicide, works across the organisation, but also with partnerships, and really endorsed the need for the multi-agency approach. It discussed the findings, the impact of the LUs, looked at funding arrangements and how partnerships were working or otherwise, and then considered how we use and understand our police powers and issues around racial disproportionality. And then also what the impact of the public health approach to addressing serious youth violence was. Across the board, HMIC found key themes from the report, including the need to simplify the funding arrangement and the benefit of long-term funding in this area, and how it was really important to have easier and a shared governance, because actually that could be a real blocker to how people manage the work and the outcomes for members of the public. And they also looked at where VRUs were existing in forces and where they weren't, to see how those improved our outcomes, and looked at how we assessed emerging threat and resource allocation or evaluation around interventions to make sure that they were effective. There are a wide range of issues that are raised in the report around both negative and positive behaviours. They talked about information sharing, how we looked at gang induction training, bringing some schools work. So it's a really broad report, which resulted in recommendations for both Home Office partners and the Chief Constables or Chief Constables. I've listed the recommendations there, and I think they're pretty straightforward and clear. The interesting part about this report is that there was also commissioned a use of voice report, which is seeking the views of young people who are involved or have been victims or are offenders in serious youth violence. And that really complemented the report and talked about the need for building a relationship of competence in the police and the services. It was uncomfortable reading in terms of the need for further work in that area, the perceptions of young people, how we engage and how we go out and make sure those relationships are built far stronger. In terms of West Midlands involvement, we were highlighted for good work around really innovative use of social influences for the organisation. And whilst HMIC recognised that was potentially a risk, it was a risk we were prepared to take to make those appropriate interventions. In terms of the next report, we then had a report in April which looked at how well the police and the National Crime Agency tackled the online sexual abuse and exploitation of children. Again, West Midlands was an on-site evidence gathering force, as well as providing the data return. The terms of reference and the recommendations obviously outlined, but in short, the themes from the report found that there was a lack of minimum standards, a deviation by some forces from the APP into local behaviours and practices, a lack of performance measures, and poor risk assessment. In some forces, we experienced inadequate resourcing, and there were issues with information sharing with partners and the NCA for detrimental effect, and there was also lack of training. However, the report did recognise that nationally there was a quick response on the whole to arrest suspects and protect children, and the staff were incredibly dedicated to this work stream. And that wellbeing provision for officers and staff in these difficult roles had improved over a period of time. So then moving forward into the recommendations, 16 recommendations were made, 5 for national police councils, for partners, and 11 for chief constables or chief officers, which I've listed in the report. The third report was the vetting, misconduct and misogyny in the police service review of progress. So the initial report was some time ago now, so HMIC have gone back and reviewed and revisited where we are in terms of progress. They originally looked at 300 cases to assess where we were in terms of detecting and dealing with misogyny and predatory behaviour, which was published in November 22, and then forces were asked to conduct a self-assessment process against these criteria, looked for progress and also steady state. The self-assessment findings were then brought back to HMIC, reg-rated, and from that, 9 vetting-related recommendations were made to each of the 43 forces. And of these, HMIC, as a documented, believe that 73% of those have been met. And in terms of counter-corruption and misconduct, 19 recommendations were made, and HMIC anticipate that 90% of those will reach the deadline for completion and confidence that they've been achieved. West Midlands has achieved progress as documented, and HMIC and West Midlands have a really positive relationship around this area of business. We have regular collaboration meetings, regular reviews, and they come along to our PSD meetings specifically. So we felt that whilst we've done really quite positive work in this area, the outstanding risks remained around improving the way police assess and investigate allegations of misconduct and establishing better processes for assessing and analysing and managing risks relating to corruption, investigations and information security. In terms of the outstanding inspection activity and that predicted, since the last JEC meeting, we've hosted the no-notice custody inspection, and there's a requirement for all forces to be inspected within a 6-year period. Due to COVID, ours has been slightly delayed, and we anticipate that we'll have a draft. We've had the draft report back to us for regulatory checks, and we should be published towards the end of June, but now probably early July before that reaches us. And we've also participated in the HMIC National Thematic, which is the homicide reduction inspection. That's complete, and again, factual accuracy has been done, and we're awaiting completion dates. Then forthcoming inspections, we've obviously got ongoing issues with appeal. VSA has been completed and stop and search is done. Spring data return is due mid-July. And then forthcoming from that, there will be the inspection of serious and organised crime, the ROCUs, and there has now been an approved super complaint on police response to stalking and harassment through the Susie Langley Trust. And then into September for on-site evidence gathering for this appeal.
Okay, so a very, very busy period and a lot to pick up. Are there any questions from members of the committee, Cap?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Rachel. So I've just got 2 questions. The first is about recommendation 3, which is training officers in the use of outcome 22, which is about diverting these programmes to reform or preventing future offending. So the force has just changed its operating model around custody and defence management, etc. Can we get some reassurance that the changes in custody and the focus here on outcome 22 is actually going to be properly linked into the commission services provided by the PCC, which is for organisations who are focused on that reform and prevention work. And I guess I'm a little bit concerned that the Restorative Justice Hub does not exist now. Having said that, the out-of-court disposal teams have come online, so it's just really some kind of bringing together of all of that to give us some confidence that's all married up with all the changes that are underway at the moment.
I think that's probably
That's probably for me to answer. So there is a conflict with outcome 22, and the conflict is that it's not counted as one of our positive outcomes. So in the olden days when we used to talk about detected versus non-detected crime, outcome 22 is not one of them. So the conflict is one of the things that HMIC measurement was on, and one of the things that the public measurement on is how much crime do you detect versus how much do you not detect. Yet outcome 22, which is the right outcome for the victim and the right outcome for often the person involved, does not count in the outcomes 1 to 8. So there's a conflict with it. We have recently, Chief and I have recently had a presentation by one of our solicitors in relation to increasing the use of out-of-court disposals. So we can bring that back as an action to a future meeting just where our assessment of where I think the force is at the moment. But as the committee itself will recognise, it's like painting the fourth bridge, because with the rate at which we are recruiting, we've got to continue and keep refreshing that because of the number of outcomes that are available to officers. So we can bring that back for a future one to give that reassurance, and the join up between the local provision of officers in a geographical model, the role that custody played that, and then how that then links into the commission services, because we all want to make sure the commission services are adding value and the money's being spent in the right areas.
So, and I think part of the issue is because there's new custody blocks coming online, the commission services haven't had an opportunity to match their delivery against the new model. So it's kind of helping them match where the force is going, which I think is really important. And then the other question, and that part of it is for the OPCC, to be honest, which is about the chief and the PCC providing commission services for children. Is a supportive therapeutic for those affected by online sexual abuse. I'm not sure where we are with that, and I don't know whether that's an update we can ask for, because it's really important to make sure that's matched as well.
We'll take that away and ask for that update to be reported back. I don't know the answer right now.
Yeah, sure. No, and nor do I, which I should do as well.
Okay, that's helpful. So that's two things to come back. I mean, the answer to that second one could perhaps be circulated, you know, once we know. But I think to come back to next committee on that issue of out of court settlements and custody hubs, etc., would be helpful. Thank you. Anyone want to ask anything else? Yes, Charmaine?
Yeah, my question is just about the improving the way police assess and investigate allegations of misconduct. So we've had some really high-profile cases recently. So for it to still be quite high, even though there's been progress, I'd like to find out a little bit more of what is making it still high and why.
Chair, I can answer that. So that is point 3. I haven't got any page numbers on here, but it says that we've got 2 red risks. That's data that was taken from February of this year. We've not got 2 red risks, we've only got 1 left. So of the 28 recommendations that were made, the one that we've still got outstanding is all forces were required to review all cases that involve misogyny, discrimination, domestic abuse, those sort of offences that floated to the surface during the reviews. We were required to review every misconduct investigation that had been conducted in the last 3 years. So the forces that were visited by HMIC and inspected, there was a methodology that was recommended, which was you need to review them like this. We have not done it that way because our view is that those reviews were not thorough enough. So the reason we're red is because we're taking longer to review them. So every one of our cases is being reviewed by either one of the detective chief inspectors, the detective super, or the detective chief in PSD. So that's the only one that's red, and I'm comfortable that it's red. In fact, I would rather it be red than be green, because if it was green, like lots of other forces, we'd have written them off really quickly and we're taking our time to review them. So the last update is that we've nearly done it all, but actually we should all take some reassurance that we're really taking our time to go through them by senior detectives to make sure that we've not missed anything at all.
That's helpful. Thank you. Okay. Yes.
Sorry, Chair, can I just just update on one thing which I think
Yes.
would be useful. So Rachel has covered that we've got 80 plus outstanding recommendations, which is similar to our most similar group of forces. That's not a position that I support, and the colleagues in the room will know this. So I chair our HMIC board. We should not have over 80 recommendations, because the bit that's not on there is the date on which they were set. So some of them are years old. The force, in my view, has not been prompt enough at actually reviewing the recommendation, actioning it out to senior people, to put the mitigation in place to address it, and then to write off the recommendation. So if you look at the table at 2.6, which tells you, for example, we've got 45 level 2 recommendations. So all of those don't require any more work by HMIC. They simply require us to do the work, and then, although it says Chief Constable, it can be delegated to me. So it then requires a letter from me uploading onto the HMIC portal to say, we've read that recommendation, it might be a national recommendation, we've done the work, we've adopted a new practice and we've changed it. And over the next 6 to 12 months, what I want this committee to see is those numbers. Now, the numbers might stay the same because we'll go through appeal inspection, so we'll get some new ones at the end of it. But what I would like in this report in the future is for you to see the dates of some of them and hopefully show that we are progressing some of them, because some of them we're going to close because they're so old that we've had a subsequent HMIC inspection since then and the world's changed. So we need to make much quicker progress at getting rid of them, because the way that I want the force to approach HMIC is it's free consultancy. So all it is free consultancy that points out the things that we could be better at. So I think it would be useful for this committee to see the dates that exist on them and how the force has responded to closing them down.
That's very helpful and very good news, I think, from the committee's point of view, and it is something that we've spoken about before now, so we would welcome seeing that. Okay, everyone happy then with the action? I can say His Majesty's Inspector. I can never get the letters out. So okay, so with that update on the Inspectorate, thank you very much, and we will move on to the insurance report, or the self-insurance report, as it should probably be called. It's going more and more that way, isn't it, Janie? Okay, over to you.
Yeah, good morning, Madam Chair, board members and colleagues. So I'm here again this year's report on the insurance programme for the force. I think it's helpful if I split it into two halves. We have what we call the casualty programme, which is liabilities, employees liability, public liability, motor. Then we have the property and assets programme. The expensive side of it is the liability and casualty programme. So you'll note in the paper there that we're in the last year this year of a 5-year agreement. So we'll be going out to tender next year. The market remains extremely challenging. There still remains probably only 2 insurers who are interested in public sector risks, and we're even less attractive as a blue light risk. In the past couple of tenders that I've been involved in, we've only ever had 1 response, but we'll keep that on the lowdown really. I'm hopeful next year we will have 2. We're already working towards putting ourselves in a really good position, our shop window looking attractive, what have you. But last year, at the tender 4 years ago, we increased our policy excess to 500,000. We did that as part of a strategy to lower the premiums. And we just blend things through to make it an appetite that we can take the cover there. So that means every claim we are self-insured up to £500,000, but we have got a safety net in that in any one policy year we have in place what's called a stop loss. So if we should have a catastrophic year, we wouldn't have a sort of an open-ended expenditure. I think the stopgap this year is 9.6 million. But obviously that's a policy year, so the claims can come in very many years. We can be having claims at the moment going back to the 80s or whatever on dated model. So the employer's liability and the public liability renewed in November at 714,000. That excludes the insurance premiums tax on all insurance premiums for everyone is 12%. There is a lobby from the public sector to try and get that set aside for the public sector. It's a bit of a stealth tax. The real challenge on the casualty programme comes from the motor risks. The blue light risk there is quite scary. You've got blue light vehicles, and some of our colleagues have had a couple of claims at 15 or 20 million pounds per claim. So you can understand why insurers are really nervous around that, but we are still holding the risk there at £500,000 excess. There's some benchmarking taking place at the moment. We are super keen on our rate. We pay £365 a vehicle, albeit that's got a £500,000 excess. So we are in a good place. We'll see what next year brings, but the casualty programme is where it is with that excess. We've got a project going on around our motor accident processes in force. We obviously self-insure our own damage, which costs us about £1.8 million a year. We're looking at tightening up the processes there to try and gain as much efficiencies as we can. That can include things like reporting of accidents really quickly. And I'm working with Pete there and the fleet services team, but an example of that would be a motor accident that happened 7 weeks ago that wasn't reported. It involved a private hire vehicle. First we knew about it was when the solicitors wrote in and said our client's still in a hire vehicle, and they'll be probably trying to claim £400 a day for that. So there's a lot of work to be done there. There's a lot of potential to shave some efficiencies around that, and we are working really hard on that side of it. So that's the casualty programme. And we've got the property and assets programme that shows all our buildings and our assets. That's due for, we're just working towards a tender on that for this year. We work with other forces. We've got a collaboration agreement for that. There's been an increase from last year, but that's because we did an exercise with property services and increased our sum insured across the force estate, and it went from 376 million to 693 million for the buildings and contents sum insured. But we still only pay 100 and just shy of £140,000 for that policy. I think we've added in since last year that the market opened up a little bit, and we decided to effect some right damages insurance, which I think is a wise move that gives us some assurance and some safeguards if there were to be formal riots kick off again. I think last time we had them in 2011, it cost the force £2 million. We haven't got any insurance for that, and there hasn't been insurance in the insurance industry available, but we have managed to now secure that. Got the Heritage Museum with bits and pieces of miscellaneous policies. We've got some costs on insurance claims handling. We handle all the public liability claims in-house, but the motor, third party, the employer's liability go externally. We've got an insurance broker appointed. The costs are quite sort of modest, and could be a question asked about why we need that. We need that because some insurer that tender won't deal directly with us anyway.
So there's only one, but they won't talk to us direct.
So
Seems
some,
bizarre.
no, they will, yeah, they will. I think
Okay.
in fairness, it may be because some forces don't have insurance professionals
Yes.
in post, it's tagged on, so they're dealing by having a broker, they'll deal through a broker, and there's that assurance for the insurer when they're dealing with that. So that's the placement of all the insurance policies, very much as it is. The premiums are pretty steady. The increase hasn't been significant. Where there has been rate increases, they've been quite low. Some of the premium increase would be due to our uplift in staff numbers under the employer's liability policy. We've had an increase in our fleet size, so that would create an increase, and then an uplift in sums insured for the buildings. We've got a drone fleet that's increasing significantly as well as we go along. So coming back then to how we fund it all, we've obviously got that self-insured element. Or I should just return to the property and assets and say we only have £1,000 excess on that policy. So we're not self-insured for that, we're all right there. And the only other point on the property policy is the Nexus building. While we're working through a programme of putting fire suppression in, the insurers have imposed a 20% co-insurance condition. So it's not an excess, it's a co-insurance. So if there were to be a total loss, we would be responsible for 20% of the claim. And I think it's insured for 46 million. So just to put that, because that's an exceptional set of arrangements for that project at the moment. Coming back to how we fund it all, we've got the self-insured element around the injury claims, if you like. We have an insurance fund. Every single claim that open has a reserve. That reserve is regularly and closely monitored into the realistic expectation of what it will cost. If there's any material changes in the claim, that reserve is reviewed and reflected. Since the last meeting, we have introduced a process of working with accountancy colleagues that we have quarterly forecasts. So we'll have an average spend per quarter, and then we forecast any large claims that we expect to settle in the next quarter. So that then provides us with some horizon scanning of what we actually need. Because I think our reserves are something in the region of 15 million, but our insurance fund is only 63% of that. But those reserves, they'll never all settle tomorrow, they'll never all settle this quarter. There could be years in the making. So I've worked with Pete, so we don't necessarily need access, don't need that provision all of the time, but we need to be able to demonstrate that we are aware of what we need and when we might need it. So then it comes down to the total costs. I'll talk about the insurance provision because people talk to me about a budget, and I don't think it's a budget, it's a provision. We don't have a choice. If we're liable, we've got to find the money to pay the claim, and we choose whether or not we insure our assets and property. So you'll see the figures on the paper there coming at 21 million is the insurance provision for the fund at any one time, and that's made up of insurance premium spend is just under 2 million. The claims payments per year cost us 4.8 million, and then we've got 15 million reserved in open claims that we're still working our way through.
Thank you very much, Janie. What we're always assured of at the end is that this is very well understood and very well managed in the force. It's just a shame that the insurance industry as a whole has just forgotten what it's supposed to be there for, which is sharing the risks with people as opposed to actually ensuring they never take any. Okay, Bhupinder.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me, difficult paper. I don't envy cost of living crisis. Insurance companies premiums are going through the roof. That's not bad, is it, though? The car insurance, what, £365 per vehicle compared to £299 previous year?
Yeah.
So it's about an increase of what, 64 quid, let's say? Not bad, really.
No, that's good.
Maybe that was down to good negotiations,
It
I
was.
don't know. You know.
I'm going to take that.
Yeah, why not?
I'll take it, yeah.
Just one thing I want to pick on, 4.1. You've got here that individual claim values in excess of 15 million. What's that compared to, let's say, 2020?
I'm sorry, what point is that?
Yeah, we're on more insurance,
Oh, right.
4.1.
Yeah, so a couple of forces have had motor accidents where pedestrians, oddly young men, have been injured by a blue light run, but they've survived.
Okay.
So if you've got a 19-year-old lad that's then going to need 50, 60 years care, that's where your 15, 20 million pound motor claims come in.
Nice.
And that's, I mean, I know if you, so the motor insurers, that force have had, I think they've got 25 million pound reserves on 2 motor claims. And if you think our motor insurance, if we had that this year, our motor insurance premium was 681,000,
Right.
but we could have a 15 million pound claim.
Yeah.
So the insurers then have got to balance their books, and there could be 15, 16 million pound out for that year.
Yeah.
Touchwood, we've not had anything that we've had an employer's liability claim once that settled for just over £2 million. Our insurance premium for that year was 138,000. So when people say the insurers, you wouldn't want to be a motor insurer necessarily. I exploit our position as a large force that they want our premium income in the big pot. Because if we pull back, their pot for all forces is less. So I exploit that a bit.
Could I ask you that? Blue light incidents over a 3-year period, what are our figures like?
We have about 800 motor accidents a year. Some are our fault, some are not our fault. I can't put my finger, I haven't got the data to be able to tell you when they've had the blue lights and sirens on, but I can come back and confirm that because that fleet would hold that data. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chair.
Chair, just to kind of provide some wider assurance. So Janie sits within legal services, is an insurance professional, and as an organisation, you can see we genuinely benefit from that, both in terms of the deals, in terms of the commercial arrangements that we have with our insurers, who are challenged very significantly from Janie on a regular basis. I kind of have a monthly briefing with Janie, and obviously we work very closely with Devinder and the finance team to ensure that we've got the right provisions in our accounts as well. I think that assurance is something that I haven't had necessarily in other courses that I've worked in, and it's certainly something that we need to continue to recognise that good practice, and I think with the challenges ahead, we'll need that. So, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks very much, Jane. Then we'll move on to item 8, which is the internal audit annual report, and Gemma's going to present this.
Thank you, Chair. So the report provides an update on the work completed by the team during 2022-23, and it also includes the head of audit opinion based on the work that we've done. Just to highlight a couple of areas from the report. Last year we completed 19 assurance audits, and the majority did receive a reasonable assurance opinion. One audit also received a substantial opinion, which obviously demonstrates a good framework of governance and controls. 2 audits received a minimal assurance opinion during the year. That was child abuse, which was the learning from the inspection report, and also RASO. But the RASO audit obviously was a follow-up from the previous year audit that we did, and both audits have been reported to the committee. There were a small number of audits that we were unable to conclude at the end of 2022-23, and those are now being progressed through this year and will be reported to the committee. We issued 84 recommendations in the year. 2 of those recommendations were minimal, which again relate to the child abuse audit. But just to add, that doesn't include the RASO recommendations, because obviously it was a follow-up and we didn't want to double count the numbers. 38 follow-ups have been undertaken during the year, with a combined implementation rate of 82%, considering the fully and partially implemented recommendations. It is a slight decline based on last year's percentage, which was 86%, and there are some older recommendations that are still obviously open, which has contributed to that. And we are continuing to get updates on that, and obviously we continue to provide updates to the committee on progress. In terms of the effectiveness of the team, we're fully compliant with the standards, and we've done a self-assessment, which again is we're fully compliant, and that was also supported by our external assessment in June 2022 as well. We've had good feedback from clients. 100% of our survey results wrote us as good or very good, which is really pleasing, and we've had some really good comments back as well, which is also pleasing to note. The completion of the plan was slightly below the target of 90%, and as we reported to the committee, there has been some resource issues during the year, which we've updated you on. We've had a new member of staff start, and also there was a period of absence by a member of the team. Again, just to reach that sort of completion level, we are sort of working through the remaining audits at the moment. So generally, overall, it does show a really good picture for the force and the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office, which has resulted in that reasonable assurance opinion that we've given. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much. Are there any questions? No? We're all very happy. And we recognise that final point about resources in the team, it's only a small team, so you know if there's one member of staff who's not there, it does have an impact, and that's ongoing, of course. But we hope soon you'll be back up to full strength. But we recognise that that's inevitable. We can't do anything about it. Okay, thanks very much, Gemma. That's really good. No questions. So we'll go on to what's happening this year then, and Pamela's going to do the update for where we are at the moment.
So this report shows an update on internal audit activity since the last meeting in March. We've issued 3 final audit reports, a mixture of limited, reasonable and substantial. The report shows 4 audits that are waiting at draft stage. Actually, we've just thank you to Pete for signing off the IT change management one. That's been finalised just yesterday with a reasonable assurance, and the other 3 reports are just waiting for the final acceptance before we can issue the final reports, and hopefully they'll go out imminently. The sort of next few tables from table 2 to 4 just show a breakdown of the recommendations that we've followed up. So since March, we've followed up on 11 audits, and at the moment the implementation rate showing at 85%, which is continuing to grow from the last sort of couple of meetings. March was 83%, so we're doing quite well in terms of implementation of recommendations.
We've got a number of follow-ups that are currently in progress, so that will change in the next couple of weeks. And then table 3 and 4 just show a breakdown of the number of recommendations and the high, medium, low. In terms of the high and medium recommendations, we're again remaining the same at around 75% implementation rate, which is good. In terms of other areas of activity, so we continue to do the National Fraud Initiative exercise, and the report just shows an update on the current position in terms of the 76 deceased pensioner matches that were identified, and we're working with the force on the sort of overpayments resulting from that. And we've identified the root causes that, again, the force senior managers are looking at how we prevent those going forward. In terms of creditor matches as well, there's that one duplicate that's just over 31, and that was due to an error, again, working with senior managers to prevent that again in the future. We continue to sit on the Forces Information Assurance Working Group and the SIM that took place in April and May, and that will continue throughout the year as well. We had a request for some advice on the community initiative to reduce violence programme, which is Home Office funding, and the project leads were asking for some advice on purchasing options to help sort of, purchase low-level essentials required for those young people that are supported through the programme. So we've had sort of meetings with project leads and shared services and agreed sort of to use existing purchasing options for that. So that work continues, and we'll continue to advise on sort of working protocols and practices going forward on that one. In terms of performance and KPIs, majority of the KPIs we've achieved 100% You'll notice the percentage of the audit plan, just as Gemma's relayed, is we're currently at around about the 83% of last year's audit plan. We are still working on last year's audits. Majority of those are at draft and final stage. And that is due to, as Gemma said, resourcing issues. We've not finalised any audits from this year's audit plan, but we've started those and they're currently in progress at the moment. I think just going forward, we just have to be mindful of refreshing the audit plan given the staffing resources that we're continuing. So hopefully in August we'll be in a better position of looking at how many days we've got left in the plan and how we can resource the audits coming up. So we'll liaise with Force Exec team, senior managers and yourselves to have a look at what we can do going forward. The appendices show a breakdown of the audits, but one I just wanted to highlight was since last meeting, we've issued a limited assurance and uniform services in Pete's area. And we've got an external contract for the National Uniform through the National Uniform Managed Service. And they highlighted quite a few issues. I won't go through the details in Appendix 1, but some of the key things around some specialist equipment has to be provided following training, and the uniform service team didn't have the process in place to sort of evidence that people had completed training. So we found some officers had been allocated uniform that they weren't entitled to, or couldn't evidence that they'd passed the test or even sat the test. There's some issues with uniform being delivered to designated local delivery sites across force police sites, which are not manned. So in some places, deliveries were left in open spaces. Whilst it's restricted to internal officers and staff, we did find missing items being reported. Analysis of the data that was available during 21-22, not all of it specifies when missing items, whether they're just sort of during use or at time of delivery. But from what we could decipher, we think around at least £5,000 during that period between October 21 and September 22 is linked to deliveries going missing from the delivery points. There was a couple of IT issues, but we've liaised with IT&D and the uniform team have worked with them to sort of decipher where whether that's an IT local issue or whether with the suppliers. So we sort of got that assurance that due to the IT network security, there's not a risk of sort of external access to the HR and sort of the uniform system, but sort of low-level risks around internal unauthorised access. One of the things that I suppose led to this was the not using the lean linking supplier performance management portal, which could have highlighted some of these issues that we've identified in the audit. The other thing is around the lack of sort of reporting from the external system, which is something that the senior managers are now escalating and trying to get resolved. The contract with the current supplier is due to expire March 2024, so the team have already, and senior managers already looking at procurement processes at the moment and have started building some of these issues into that, so hopefully going forward these issues will be addressed.
Thanks very much for that update. I think the first thing we should say is that congratulations to Pete and his team, and to Lynn and her team, and perhaps somebody can pass it back to Mark, on the substantial opinion on budgetary controls, because that really does underline what was said at the beginning of the system of the meeting. So Devinder as well, obviously, so you can pass that back to staff, because that's a very good result. Very good result. If just to pick up, because I can't remember who else, well, I know Kath was here because she's been here as long as I have, but the minimal report on uniform, there are one or two items that are new from the last time we ordered it, but the last time we ordered it, there was a key concern about uniform being delivered to buildings that were not necessarily secure and items being missing because we hadn't got a proper system for identifying who was picking up what. And we got quite exercised about it in committee, not because of the monetary value, but just because the notion that there might be uniforms or other bits of police equipment that somebody had that we didn't know who'd got it and the use it had been put to, didn't seem to have been picked up as a risk, a sufficiently high risk. So it is incredibly disappointing, sort of 4 or 5 years later, to find that actually that is still an issue. And the procurement of who delivers it is not going to make any difference to that. That's something about systems being developed that mean actually there is a way of ensuring that we know who's got the equipment that's been ordered. So I'm looking at Spot. I mean, you need to go back and have a look. But that is, and I don't know all people. I don't know whether other forces have got other systems. But it feels as though this is something which would be very easy to do in an age of barcodes and phones and whatever, of having a system for identifying what is where.
Chair, thank you. I share your disappointment and frustration in terms of the areas that have been previously identified and have arisen within this audit as well. Do want to provide some assurance, however, that we're doing a root and branch review of our provision of uniform at the moment. So it's not just about the real frustrations with the lack of performance of the current supplier. It is about some internal controls as well. But we've given notice to the current supplier that we will not be continuing or extending the contract anymore. In my opinion, it hasn't represented good value for money. The heart of the problems that we've seen have been contributed to by the supplier. So we will be bringing a kind of a really comprehensive in-house service together. We're going to work much more closely and already are with the procurement team. I'm very grateful to Devinder's procurement team through Alison in terms of the way that we're looking at colleagues like Blue Light Commercial to look at new contracting arrangements for uniform supply to give us better value, and indeed have better internal processes. So really happy to use this as an opportunity to share how that restructure will develop. It is something over a 6-month period we're looking at, Chair, just given the fact that we're having to give notice to the current supplier, create new arrangements in-house and then move that forward. But my plan on that is actually we'll deliver some quite significant savings, but also have some stronger controls and improved processes in place as well.
Okay. Devinder?
Chair, just want to echo your concerns. I think you're absolutely right. It is a serious concern that uniform like this can be delivered to unmanned areas and can go missing. Where is it ending up? you know, it should have thought. But for me, it's very, very simple. I mean, surely, you know, the organisation should know that this uniform is going to be delivered to an unmanned area. It shouldn't be there. It should be for collection. You know, the person or persons can collect this particular type of uniform or material or items. Shouldn't be delivered. And if it's been going on for 2 or 3 years or longer, it's wrong.
Okay, well, I'll take the assurance from Pete, but we'll hope to hear something that's been devised that will make it more secure once it's arrived. Kath?
Pete, can I highlight detained property?
Yes, yes.
Could you just give us some flavour of what improvements have been made in that area, because it's kind of been going on for quite a while. And I mention this every time, but I can't believe within all the property that we can't find that there is a missing court exhibit, and whether we've had any cases that have actually failed because those exhibits cannot be found at the right time.
Thank you. So firstly, in terms of progress, so I could probably split the detained property issues into 2 areas. One is we are in the latter stages of centralising detained property, which was previously held in a whole host of stores at local stations and so on, without necessarily the kind of complete record keeping or stock taking that there was. So as we have been centralising the stock and bringing it into kind of the Nexus centre, clearly that highlights areas where items have been missing. So that's kind of driven kind of that approach. I think the assurance I get about the centralisation piece, is notwithstanding everything's together, is that when we are able to kind of control that in a single way going forwards, we've got a much greater level of strength around understanding what's where and what's booked out and so on. As far as the identifying the missing items and going through, I'm very grateful. I've had a lot of support from ACC, Andy Hill, who's at the moment with the shared services team has been looking at the whole list of items, categorised into the type of things that they are. For example, a lot of things like seized cannabis that can just be destroyed, and just there's other things that are being booked out by officers, but not booked back in. So that not everything is actually missing, as it were. It's probably somewhere in the estate, but it's kind of doing. So we've got a small team that are going around. We've looked very recently through the performance board about increasing the size of that team within shared services so that we can actually get this work done quicker. So we are doing that. There haven't been any instances yet that has impacted on the court issue that you refer to. I think ACC Bell previously has given that confirmation to the committee, and Andy Hill kind of said a similar approach, but that doesn't mean to say that we shouldn't get on with this. So we've got, I don't think we've ever had a greater emphasis on this in kind of over the last few years as we have done. Certainly over the last kind of 9-12 months, we're giving an awful lot of scrutiny. We've got a really good team approach. The Deputy Chief Constable is holding both the pod areas, the shared services area, as well as the centralisation project through me to account through the performance day that we have. And it's something that I absolutely welcome, because I do want to see us ensuring that we bring all of that together. So again, I'm really happy to help the committee that we could provide further updates. I'm happy to do that as a standing item in a similar way that I'm happy to do that with a performance. I think something that I personally have taken very seriously since I've arrived, and I'm conscious that centralisation project had gone on for about, I don't know, 6 years or something like that, I think, Chair, and certainly one that we've absolutely said we will bring to a conclusion, and then we'll deal with all of those items. So I do get some assurance that we're dealing with it in that way. Doesn't mean to say that we, take our foot off the gas in any way whatsoever.
Okay, so there's not any question that the new localisation project is going to reverse that particular element of centralisation.
No, not at all.
That's reassuring too.
Thank you.
Bhupinder?
Very quickly, Chair, can we have an update on this unmanned sites? uniform being delivered in September, in what has been, you know, what processes?
Well, yes, we've been told we'll be updated on the thing. So, yeah. Richard?
Thank you for the report. 6.2 about the resources and the kind of the ever-moving position. Can you give us your current thoughts about how that might affect the climate? I know you've talked about your brilliant. Do you have any thoughts about what might get dropped from the plan or what might get prioritized?
Obviously, because we've had not Liam moving out of head of audit, and Gemma and I are acting up for the last sort of 3 months, and I think that's going to continue for another month or so. We'll have that shortfall of around about 90 days. Gemma's also leaving us and moving on, so we're currently going to be having some vacancy there. We were unsuccessful recruiting in the first round of interviews, and the next lot are due early August, at which point we could hopefully then estimate roughly when that post will be recruited into. Inevitably, we are going to be short for at least around 90 days, and we'll have to start looking at what we can drop out of the plan, and that will be a discussion through Force Executive, senior managers within OPCC and yourselves, really as to obviously what's happening, what's coming out of the operating model as well from the force, where the risk profile has changed, that kind of thing. So we will do a refresh hopefully in August, September time, when Bean's back with us as well, as to look at what number of days we've got left for the remainder of the year and what we can reclassify it as high and medium and concentrate on those audits in agreement with the Force Executive.
Yeah, I'm expecting that there will be, before the next committee, there will be a conversation with me that we've had this discussion, we're proposing this, this and this,
Yes.
which obviously we'll bring back to committee in September, but I'm anticipating that conversation. Lynn?
I just want to add that I think we've got to be mindful that we've got a further new member of the team, and we'll have another new member joining us as well, which creates some additional pressures. So I think it'll be a complete revision of the plan rather than just tweaks to
Yes. Okay. Well, we understand why, and we're expecting to see it next time. Thank you. Okay, thanks everybody for that. Okay, now it's dead on 11 o'clock, so I'm just going to ask that we have a short comfort break for 10 minutes to allow people to top up refreshments and everything else, and we'll resume at 11:10. Okay, so we will resume then, and we have got as far as item 10, which is the internal audit quality assurance and improvement programme. So that's back to Gemma.
Thank you, Chair. It's a requirement of our professional standards that we present this annual report to update how the internal audit service has performed against our quality assurance and improvement programme for last year, and also confirms the arrangements for this year as well. So as part of internal audit's effectiveness review, we've done a self-assessment against the public sector internal audit standard requirements, and that was undertaken during April and May this year. And a summary of the assessment is at Appendix A, and we assess ourselves as fully compliant. We also had an external assessment in June last year, which also confirmed we were fully compliant. And the external assessment also made some minor advisory actions, which have all been completed and are reported as part of Appendix B. Appendix B also includes a progress update on improvement activities. Several actions have been closed. There are 2 actions that are still in progress. One relates to our working paper system, and one relates to our audit methodologies around streamlining our audit reports and working practices, and these will be progressed throughout 23-24. And we've also set 2 new objectives around improving our audit planning approach, to try and be more agile, and also to review our KPIs, because they've been reviewed in quite some time. And we'll keep members updated on how these actions have progressed throughout the year. The report also includes a full analysis of how the service has conformed throughout the 2022-23 Quality Assurance Improvement Programme as agreed with members, which is shown at Appendix C, and we again confirm with all the requirements. And at Appendix D is the proposed Quality Assurance Improvement Programme for this year. There's no changes as with previous years. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions? Yes, Richard?
Just a quick one on one of your in-progress actions about the agile kind of methodology and the one-page report. Are you effectively going to do a key controls work?
We sort of scoping out what it can look like at the moment, so it could be that we sort of interview with what other teams have provided, and we could have that summary, but I think there'll still be an appendix to give that detail on the findings, because I think sometimes that's needed, and so it might be a little bit of a hybrid, but it'll certainly be streamlined.
I'm a little bit sceptical, if I'm honest, about one-page reports, because there's a one-page report, but then there's hundreds of appendices attached to it. So we did trial a sort of a briefer reporting format, and some of the reports that we produce, as you know, can be quite detailed and lengthy and quite complex subjects, and it doesn't always suit. And we found that we couldn't get a style that fitted all of the audits, so then you end up with multiple formats to suit audits, which doesn't really work. So hence I think I'm a little bit sceptical as to what we can do, and I wouldn't necessarily advocate that it should be a one-page report, but we need to sort of streamline.
I have seen some examples in other organisations where, in that kind of desire to reduce the size of the report, they don't make any recommendations, which is kind of a slippery path, I think.
Yeah, and that's what I would be concerned about. So we haven't rushed to make any changes in our approach to that yet, but it's something that I think the industry is pushing us towards. But a lot of people in the head of audit position are really sceptical about that move. So.
And it risks just extending because you bring something too short to this committee, and people are just going to say, oh, and what does that mean, and what is that, and then you end up having to bring it back with a whole load more details. So yes, I think we need to get the balance right.
Or it's very in the appendix.
Oh yes, yes. So it's not scrutinised at all, and that is even worse.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I think that people who want to go their own trumpet, but in fact the external assessment not simply said you're totally compliant, but actually said, some of the things that you do here could be helpful to other people to know. That's good to know. But I always think that people can learn from each other. So I mean, the one thing that's not anywhere in the quality assurance is about links to other internal audit teams and learning from them and, you know, sort of sharing experience. So is there any of that going on? Have you got links to any other, let's say, in-house? I know, because a lot of internal audit is not actually in-house. Do you have links with any other in-house police audit teams, internal audit teams, and are you learning from them? Yeah.
Yeah, so there is a national police internal auditors group. As you can imagine, the majority of the people that attend that are outsourced positions to local councils or an external company. So I think there's only about 5 forces that have a purely internal audit team. But there is a group, and we do have networking events. We have a 2-day conference once a year. But they've more recently, I've become part of that police audit group board, and you might laugh when I say this, but I'm actually now, I've volunteered to become the secretary of that board because, you know, the second biggest force, that it's the Met head of audit that chairs the board.
Yeah.
So myself and head of audit from Thames Valley are joining that group to start sort of taking some that work forward. So there are opportunities. It's not as established as I would say in local councils, but there are opportunities for us to share best practice.
Good, good. Well, I'm glad to hear that. And, you know, perhaps next year, if there's anything coming through from that national group, you might include that in the report. Excellent. Any questions from anyone else? Okay, thanks very much. That's good. So we'll move on to item 11, which is the annual governance statements. So now there are 2 annual governance statements. They are also embedded within the statement of accounts. So we'll only deal with them once, and we'll deal with them now. So are you going to start, Lynn, or is Pete going to start? Or
I can start.
Okay.
Yeah. So the draft AGSs of both the Force and the OPCC are both prepared in line with the framework that was produced by SIPFA and Solace called Delivering Good Governance Framework. This framework's been in for quite a while, so the statements that you've got in front of you will be familiar formats, because I think the format hasn't changed for quite some time. And what the statements do is summarise the overall arrangements around governance. So they'll focus on things like the police and crime plan, the strategic police and crime board, what the force governance structures are, and what the holding to account functions are, all of which members will be familiar or are in the joint scheme of governance, which comes to this committee once a year. The statements also include an update on effectiveness, and that includes the role of this committee, the role of the police crime panel, and internal audit in providing that effectiveness oversight. In terms of highlighting significant governance issues, I think the OPCC statement actually defines what significant governance issues are. Most of those in the statement, the PCC statement this year, focus on the internal audits that receive minimal assurance opinions, so it focuses mainly on child abuse this year, which members will be familiar. It was reported in March, focused on things like the lack of trained detectives and high workloads, which can impact on the progression of investigations and the service to victims. The statement also gives an update on the governance issues raised last time. So again, we'll see things like domestic abuse, case management, and the updates that we've got on the implementation of those recommendations. We've also included as an appendix a more detailed information around how the governance arrangements map to the key elements of the SIPFA governance framework, and particularly those 7 principles of good governance. So we've put that in again because I know members like that supporting information. So the next steps after it's been discussed today will be for both of the statements to be included in the statements of accounts once they've been formally signed off. We're happy to take any questions.
Okay. Are there any questions then on the ECC one? Yes, Bridget?
It was just an observation with that both. I think the report is very comprehensive, and I think to your credit, in recent years you've moved in terms of the content, and there's more focus on outcomes now, isn't there? When I was first new to this role, it was very much about describing processes with what's the effect of that. So thank you for that. I think it's just a welcome. The direction of travel, I think, is very welcome.
Thank you. Okay, if there's nothing else on that, should we move on then to the force statement?
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief because so many of the issues that we just introduced from an OPCC position are relative to the force statement. I don't think anything in here will be a surprise to the committee. We've been open throughout the course of the year in terms of how we're developing the force and so on, and reflecting that in there. I think also very similar really in terms of format to the previous year, as we've said, based on the good practice. We will do a bit of further work as well in terms of mapping and confirming, as in the OPCC list, the key elements of the guidance when we provide this the next time round. I think I would reflect, though, as we go forwards, one of the key things that we want to do is to not just have this as an annual governance statement, and this very much speaks to the Deputy Chief Constable's comments earlier about improvement and grip to our governance and to our performance. I think what we'll do is kind of have probably a quarterly update through the either the organisational risk or the performance board in terms of just any changes to the key governance throughout the course of the year. So this then does become effectively a governance statement, not just an annual governance statement that we look at on a more frequent basis. And I think that's good practice from a force perspective, given the dynamic nature of some of the risks that we discuss and so on and so forth that may ultimately find their way into this document. So other than that, Chair, obviously there's an update that reflect the Chief's new values kind of within here, but I think probably beyond that, little else to draw out unless Michelle wants to put a thing out from an SDA perspective.
No, I don't think there is at all. I think the governance structure as is reflected in the annual governance statement. But as the Deputy Chief Constable has said, that is something that we really want to look at, and we want to make sure that that delivers. So I wouldn't be surprised in the next annual governance statement that that's reflected in there. Other than that, no, thank you.
Okay. Any questions or comments from members of the committee? I'm struggling to find it now, but just picking up on what Lynn was saying about the references in the OPCC statement to internal audit and some of the findings. I'm sure somewhere in the force statement there is a reference to Thrive. Am I right? Is it in there somewhere? There is, and there is. It did occur to me that if you were applying the same sort of the standards to how you were reporting it, there could be a comment within, because the Thrive programme, everybody's happy that's very good. But actually, what successive audits have shown is that there are issues with it being properly used, and in some cases not used at all, and certainly issues in terms of the Thrive assessment being used to determine priorities for dealing with things. And it just occurred to me that if you were applying the same sort of standard of openness, there might be room for a comment there that says we've got this very good system, but actually we've still got work on ensuring that all officers are fully compliant with it, and that it's being used, it's being made best use of. Just
Not Chair, it's helpful.
couldn't find it. I still haven't found it. I'm sure it's there.
It definitely is. I think it's on
it's
page
there.
number 8.
Yeah. I don't have a system for highlighting things that I'm going to come back to. Yeah, good. Thank you. Okay, anything else? Okay, good. So thank you both for those. They are both, they're long documents, but they're both very easy to read, which is always a real benefit. Right. Okay. So that brings us to the very, very lengthy documents that are the statement of accounts. So over to Davinda.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, members. Chair, if you allow me just a minute, just to introduce my colleague to the right. So Sue has joined the force. She's been with us about a year, and she's joined us as our head of accounting and tax. So if you remember previously, Ravi used to attend these meetings and present all things of accounts and then treasury management. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to introduce you to Sue. Okay, so if I jump into the paper then. So the paper itself tries to set the scene with regards to the statement of accounts and highlight some of the key numbers. We'll talk about pension numbers because they're flagged within this paper only because of the number itself being so high, not because it's a concern or an issue. So the statement of accounts have been produced in its draft version, and they were published on the 31st of May in line with our deadline, and they were handed over to our external auditors to allow the audit to start. The statement of accounts document itself is based on the SIPA code, which is a very prescriptive document, a very lengthy document. So it provides us with a clear steer on what should and shouldn't be included, and results in a 200-page, pretty much a 200-page document. There have been no changes in accounting policy, so it's quite easy to sort of compare 21 and 22 to 22 and 23. Section 3 of this paper just draws out, I suppose, the key statements within the statement of accounts document. I won't go through that list, but that's there for you. As I said earlier, the document is very comprehensive. It's split into the various sections, starting off with the narrative reports, which gives you the context. The annual governance statements is sort of the next section, which both Lynn and Pete have just chatted through. And as Pete said earlier on, none of the issues raised within the sort of the governance statements should be a surprise as they're presented in year to yourselves. The next significant section within the accounts is the CFO statements, which gives you assurance that the actual accounts themselves have been checked by the respective CFOs and present a true and fair view of the accounts. The next section thereafter is the auditor's report, which will be completed once the auditors have completed the audit of the accounts. And then the rest of the document, which is the majority of the document, is those primary statements, the notes to the accounts, which show you how those numbers have been built up, and then the accounting policies. Moving on to the next page. So you've got the table at the top of the next page, which is the management accounts, not the financial accounts. And the distinction to draw out there is the management account simply report on the revenue, income and expenditure for the year against the budgeted position. They do not report capital transactions or non-cash transactions. Lynn touched on this particular report earlier on in the meeting, which was presented to the Strategic Police and Crime Board after a particularly sort of challenging start to the year with regards to finances. We have reported a underspend of just over 11 million, which was a relief to us, and was through our proactive management of spend throughout the year. Section 3.2 touches on the numbers around pensions. So we've had, as you would expect, an annual valuation of our pension liability. As I said earlier, it's a big number. It shows a movement of total net liability of 8.7 million down to 5.8 billion, sorry, not million, billion. And that's due to changes in the actuarial adjustments, so the assumptions they make around discount rates and inflation and salaries. There's a whole long list of stuff which they take into account. So that takes you, that's detail between 3.2 and 3.6. I thought it might be just worth just quickly sharing some explanations of the key movements in the accounts. So when we look at the comprehensive income and expenditure statement, which is on page 33 of the group accounts, you've probably noticed that overall there's an increase in income and expenditure. This is largely due to the uplift in either national or regional services, but most significantly it's the money related to the Commonwealth Games. Interest received in 21-22 we had about 570k. Last year, 22-23, this was up to 3 million. That's because we had that extra money, short-term money, which we could invest before the expenditure was incurred. So through sort of our short-term investments, we've managed to received £3 million worth of interest on that, which is great. We had fewer capital grants, which is no surprise. We valuated more properties last year, so there were higher revaluation gains, which are reported within the comprehensive income and expenditure statement. And then we've talked about the pension liability. And then in terms of significant movements on the balance sheet, which is on page 37, you would have noticed a shift from longer term to shorter term investments, and that's just with regards to our liquidity position and the timing of expenditure. That has actually benefited us in lots of ways, as we've seen interest rates increase over the year. Those short-term investments have actually attracted higher interest rates, so taking us back to that increased interest received. And then the only other thing I wanted to point out was you probably noticed the higher short-term debtor balance, and that's largely due to the higher VAT reclaims at the end of the year. So we put a lot of expenditure through in relation to the Commonwealth Games, which we were able to reclaim the VAT on, and that's why that balance in the balance sheet is higher than the previous year. So those are the headlines. In terms of next steps, so the auditors start next week. Behind the scenes, we've been providing the information that they've requested. I think it's about 88 requests of information, working papers, and yesterday when I checked, we've submitted about 66 of those 88, and we're working through the final few, which are due by the end of the week, which is tomorrow. We're expecting the auditors on site next week, and we'll see how it goes. In that probably covers the key points. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Davinda. Are there any questions from the committee?
I think it's just we've kind of revisited this earlier on in the conversation about the underspend.
Yes.
I think it was the chair's point about financially the underspend is good news, particularly on salaries or people. And some of that was eaten into by additional overtime. So we've already, but I just wanted to, that's the big issue for me in the accounts.
Fairly comfortable that the underspend on the staff or the employees' cost relates to vacancies which were held in the year. There was no blanket freeze on vacancies. Some of those we struggled to recruit to, and some of those we managed because they were not operationally critical. So fairly comfortable with that position.
It's just in reporting performance and governance terms, it's that, and they're going to repeat the argument about, providing a service or kind of, financial stewardship are often intentional in each one.
Yeah, I know. There's been no evidence that there's been any detrimental impact on service performance. I don't know whether Pete wants to add anything.
I think just to emphasise your point, Davinda, I think we had a very comprehensive position in place where if people have wanted to release those kind of held vacant posts, there's been a panel to consider those requests. Often there will be critical police staff posts that are supporting our frontline services. An awful lot of enabling services posts, however, have remained vacant throughout the course of the year as part of that planned approach. We recognise that as we look at the future kind of makeup of our enabling services and our police staff services particularly, holding those posts vacant will actually assist in potential future restructures as well. So it's more about that side of the business than the operational side.
I mean, there's always an underspend that's about vacant posts because people move and they move on and posts. There's a number of posts that won't be filled the whole 12 months. So what's the difference between that staffing underspend this year and a year in which, I mean, just in terms of a percentage, no, I'm not asking you to come up with a figure, but I'm just wondering what's the scale of difference between an average year when there will be an underspend because people have been going, and this year's underspend, which was in some elements deliberate holding of posts.
So I think at its peak in terms of kind of us kind of having that additional control on police staff vacancies. At its peak, I think we were probably around 500 vacant posts, and that was right across kind of police staff kind of enabling areas, particularly. So, you know, finance, HR, estates, IT&D. So very much in those areas. That is obviously higher than the previous years, because they would have kind of gone on to be recruited to. I'll have to come back to you on what the steady state normally would be.
That would be helpful. I suppose the other element that's a sort of a worry around this, and again, it's not about the statement of accounts really, it's more about impact, is the notion that actually some of those vacancies might have been filled by police staff, by actually police officers. Because that's a worry as well, because that's not effective. That's not effective use of your uniformed officers or other officers' stuff time, is it really? So in the moving forward, are you going to be monitoring, you know, the level of incidents of police officers fulfilling what otherwise would be civilian posts?
So the quick answer to that is yes. We are. Though it is worth re-emphasising, in the position where we have a ring-fence number of officers below which we cannot go, and we have to save some money. We don't buy anything, make anything, or sell anything. So there are only so many ways that we can save money. So there are those inevitabilities. So I'll give you a real example that's taking place at the moment, where we have taken out some layers, or in the process of taking out some layers of police staff supervisory employees in our contact centre when we centralise it into one location. Because within that contact centre, we have got inspectors and chief inspectors who have got responsibilities around critical incident command and firearms command. They can also fulfil both those. So there are circumstances when we're doing it. And the important bit is that we don't put police officers in charge of bits of business that they are simply not qualified to do, which is one of the things that I think lots of police officers saw during this kind of 2010-11 period of austerity. We were not in that period. It's not like that. I'm at pains to say to the whole of the organisation, to as I'll repeat it now, is we are not cutting our budget. So our budget continues to go, and it's a really important message that for the force. Yes, we've got to save money. One of the ways that we're managing at the moment, so Pete's articulated that process. So a department head, a chief superintendent will come forward and say, I've got this critical post that needs filling. It goes to a panel that Pete's involved in. The final decision maker is me, and I authorise or not whether those posts could be filled. To give you, for instance, I haven't said no to any at all so far, and so I'm making those decisions based on the operational need of the force, whether that is in the support service or the operational environment, not with the financial hat on. And I'm not distancing myself from it, because there's no escaping I'm the deputy chief constable. But if we get to a point where it becomes more critical, people, and Davinda will say to me, actually, we need a change of our strategic approach to this. At the moment, the assessment I'm making is, do I think that post is critical or not? And actually, for a lot of people, many of them in this room have been through that work and said it is, then I'm the final authoriser. I'm not. I don't want to think I'm not scrutinising them, but what I'm not trying to do is do everybody else's job for them. And so I think it's a clean split between Pete and I, that Pete can worry about money, I'll decide whether it's operationally crucial or not. So they're not financially motivated decisions for me.
We never escape without a question about pensions. So is the actuarial revaluation done every year?
Yeah, it's a triangle.
Yes, I was going to say. So when was it done? Because I'm just wondering, you know, the commentary says that there was assumptions about inflation and pay increases, and it's all coming down. Well, clearly it isn't, is it? So the implication is, if the next valuation is done in the next probably 12 months, there's going to be a huge move in the other direction.
So it was done in preparation for the end of for the 31st of March 2023. So it would next be done 3 years later. Okay, it is slightly odd though, because as you say, you would expect it to everything would have gone up, but I mean I don't know the list of sort of variables they look at, but they talk about CPI, which has obviously gone up. They talk about salaries, which is probably one of the other variables they look at. But I think there's a whole long list.
There's a whole long list.
I'm not an actuary.
When I chair the pension fund committee, I find it absolutely fascinating. I get lost in the detail, but I mean clearly there are other things that get like life expectancies actually.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. But it's another 3 years.
It is.
It's not being redone this year, because if it had been redone this year, I think we'd be looking at a huge movement.
I mean, if you want some detail about what the actuaries
I mean,
actually
there's
look
quite a
at.
bit in there. There's a
Yeah.
number. There's quite a bit in there. Certainly
Yeah.
around life expectancy and things like that. It's there. I know I don't want more because I will. So is there anything else? Okay, and you're starting work next week, Andrea?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, good. Excellent. Thank you very much. I mean, you know, it's a huge amount of work to get through in 20 minutes in the committee, but it's a testament to the clarity of the. I suppose there was one other thing that occurred to me. Is it the operating leases where the accounting policy has been put off and put off and put off for the last time? Is it ever gonna change?
So we're expecting it to be applied to next year's accounts.
Next year, okay.
But I'm going to hold my breath on that one.
But they've been making very late decisions, haven't they? So that, you know, you've prepared for it to change every year for the last four or 5 years, and then right at the last minute. So I mean, they're not really saving you you know, that if the argument is it's saving you the problem, you keep preparing for it and they keep putting it off.
The NHS have already adopted it this year. So
Have they? Okay. So okay. Right. Thank you very much. Okay, I think then that takes us to external audit. So Andrew, over to you. And we've got, I hope everybody caught up because we have actually got your report from last year. Yes. So that was sent late, so I hope everybody's realised that there was an additional bit to your report. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I will start with the 21-22 annual auditor's report. And apologies, this has come a little bit later than planned to this meeting. We were hoping to bring it to the last one, but I think we did actually finalise the work towards the end of December, but just in terms of diaries, in terms of finalising the report and getting it all approved, it did take a bit longer, so apologies for that delay. But in terms of the headlines of the report, we do look at 3 areas: financial sustainability, governance, and how you achieve economy, efficiency, effectiveness. And I'll just take you through each of those. So in terms of financial sustainability, probably it is worth emphasising what we're assessing and commenting on here. We are not saying that you don't face challenges. We're assessing how you manage within your means, kind of linking back to the comment I think you made during the risk paper. So very much about whether the force is living within its means and resources. And you know, we obviously look at this, whilst it's an assessment of 21 and 22, clearly this has got forward looking outlook, so we are looking at how you're planning in the medium term around this. So we have looked at how you're managing and identifying financial pressures. We're looking at how you're bridging any funding gaps with savings. We're looking at how you align your financial plans with operational plans, as well as kind of looking at how you're managing and identifying financial risk as well. And the conclusion we reached is that there aren't any significant weaknesses in the forces arrangements around managing finances, which is obviously great news. There were a couple of recommendations, improvement recommendations, I should stress, in terms of financial sustainability, though. One kind of does link back to some of the points we just made on the last paper in terms of developing more recurrent efficiency savings rather than kind of short-term tactical measures like holding vacancies, etc. Because we are of the view that you won't be able to do that forever. So it is important that you are looking at more transformational savings going forward. So that was one of the improvement recommendations. And then the other one was really kind of linking into that, kind of whether there are more opportunities around looking at shared services as a way of making those savings. Obviously, the forces have gone down this line. And you know, we do think that this is something that should be explored. I'm not saying you definitely should, but I think it's something that you should option appraise going forward as a way of potentially looking for some efficiency. In terms of governance, we look at various different things here. So we look at risk management arrangements, we look at budget setting, we look at how you manage the budgets in year, and then we'll look at how kind of standards are applied within and complied with within the force. Again, we haven't found any significant weaknesses in the arrangements that we've found in place. Obviously, there are some improvements that could be made to that, and I think they've been discussed earlier in the meeting. But overall, in terms of are they adequate, we believe that they are. One improvement recommendation was raised just around financial reporting in year. There is a 2-month time lag in terms of some financial reports at the moment, given the kind of if you like, the volatility around the financial environment at the moment. we would recommend from a good practice point of view that you try and improve that sort of timeline to maybe a month after month end. But obviously, I also do accept that there are limited resources in finance, so it's about whether you can make that happen, given the resources that you've got available to you. And then final area was around improving economy, efficiency and effectiveness. And here we look at how you performance manage each area of activity within the force. We'll also look at how you procure and how you work in partnership as well. And again, we haven't found any significant weaknesses in the arrangements within the force within that, and there weren't any improvement recommendations on that particular area. There were a few recommendations we raised last year that we followed up, which are on page 18 of the pack. We're pleased to say that progress has been made against all of those areas, and no further actions required on any of those. So we are satisfied that we can close them down now. And of course, we will follow up the recommendations we've raised this year as part of the 22-23 work. So I think with that, I'll probably just stop there and take any questions if there are any.
Thank you. Are there any questions, Kath?
It's kind of observations really. So regarding the recommendation about shared services, and Peter, you might want to come in and comment on this. So when the reorganisation started last time round, there was a lot of work done around whether shared services should remain in force or whether they should go external, and it was decided they would remain in force and have serviced the force since then. So if there is a move to review all that, and I suggest that the work that's been done previously kind of feeds into it, because I think although there would have been maybe some savings financially, actually the service provided was not what was expected. So I'd just encourage a look back there. And then the other commentary is on page 13, which relates to your assessment of the risk register and also the changes to how that's been developed. And it says, consequently, the bottom-up approach to risk management requires significant input to embed the revised arrangements force-wide. So my question to the force is, how are you going to do that then? Because there is tremendous pressure in training to get officers trained to do their policing role. Risk management is not something LPA or U officers kind of particularly do. Their risk is managing the activity. So just maybe an understanding of how that is going to be embedded in the force, and if it's not, what does it mean for that more strategic view?
Yeah. So Melissa, who's sat in the middle there, is my senior risk and assurance manager. So I'll see if there's any comment from Melissa as well. But interestingly, yesterday the DEP has set out in terms of starting that training across the force in terms of that risk management. I think he's already set out in terms of that risk maturity of wanting to aim for the gold standard and of wanting to do it. So that clearly needs to start going across the force. So Melissa and one of her team will be developing, well, the package is already pretty much developed to be able to deliver to the senior leaders so that we can start that. I think it's already started through some of the work that we've done by talking about it more, by taking it to the governance board. So that's why some of the risks are being surfaced. But there's still more work to do in terms of processes and those bits. So I think the work that the team are doing to be able to, so let's start with the senior leaders. That's, you know, your chief SUPs, CIs and equivalents. That will naturally start to filter down, and then we can look at the next steps once we've done those.
The only thing I would say there is to, because I've sat on the other side of that, is to ensure that the information you're getting back is actually meaningful.
Yeah.
And it's not a blurb about nothing. And it actually just feeds into your processes, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just the natural work that is being done, how the teams are engaging with those senior leaders, the approach to, you know, the team have developed a really simple form for leaders to fill in when there's a risk, to follow up with a conversation around, say, take me through some of the detail, let's talk through the mitigation. So this isn't about, I think previously there's been a bit of, we'll write the risk down, it's on the register, and then it's kind of there. There's a lot of work that's been done to work with people to understand it. So I think that work is ongoing anyway. That senior leaders day will kind of cement some of that learning for the senior leaders to push forward.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. The financial sustainability strand of your consideration, is the equivalent of that in the process, reflecting of the going concern kind of consideration?
No. It is different because this is really just about, it's not recognising, because obviously you have got financial pressures in terms of the resources available to you, so it's not a kind of comment around going concern at all. It is more about kind of what are the forceful arrangements in terms of living within your means, and are they adequate? So it's a different question that we're answering. We're not necessarily saying that you're a going concern for this particular bit of work. Obviously we do assess that from the accountant's point of view, albeit it's very revised in terms of what the going assessment means for a public sector body, such as yourselves. It's not like the corporate world in terms of are you going to survive for another 12 months. It's very much, are police services going to still be delivered in the community, which obviously they are. So it's a pretty straightforward assessment, to be quite frank.
Thank you. And I just, in the back of my mind, you hear kind of Northamptonshire County Council and Southwark going bust effectively.
This is where it becomes a little bit crazy, because even they will become a going concern under the current rules that follow, because as long as those services within Northamptonshire continue to be delivered, they're a going concern in the public sector world. So it's sounds strange, I know, but that's kind of the way the public sector works.
Thank you.
Okay.
Just a final observation, if I have any other questions from the members. Chair, and that was just to kind of thank the audit team for the ongoing work that we do. We work very closely together, but we do respect the kind of the audit and inspection role of our auditors. And I'll steal with pride something that the Dep said earlier that we do from an audit perspective, and that is effectively use our colleagues as free consultancy. When our audit colleagues are making recommendations, we take those very seriously, both internal and external audit actually, and actually do see that as an opportunity for us to look to improve. So, we always respond to those actions and clear them down kind of quickly in the recommendations wherever possible. So I just wanted to thank that. Obviously, look forward to the audit forthcoming from next week onwards. Thank you.
Good. Okay, everyone done log? Oh, sorry, yes, the
Can I just give you some short recommendations for it? So about the timeliness of the information going to the Strategic Police and Crime Board. We have actually moved on to click dashboards now. So we've moved away from what was quite a manual and intensive process of producing our management accounts to click dashboard, which is now a standard template and provides budget holders with live reporting on those numbers. So at any point in time in the month, they can go in and check their spend against their budgets, which will in turn allow us to feed those reports into the Strategic Police and Crime.
Okay, that's helpful, thank you. I mean, it's very good to see that actually the recommendations have already got management responses, and we've got those in front of us, so that just picks up Pete's point as well. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you, Andrew. So are you anticipating that next year you will be reporting an annual report at the same time as we're receiving the statement of accounts for the next year, or are you hoping you'll be done a little bit earlier?
So I think there will be a difference in terms of timing. So the accounts audit we're currently working towards the end of September in terms of the sign-off. Now, obviously that, as I think you may know from previous years, depends upon the pension fund audits. So we are somewhat dependent upon where they go. But the VFM report hopefully will be with you much sooner than it has been this year. So the idea will be that if we do report as planned in September on the accounts, that we will report by the end of the calendar year, or at least finalise the work. It may be that it comes to your January meeting, but we'll certainly have the report and work finished by the end of the calendar year. So hopefully things will be done a bit sooner.
Good. Okay, thank you. Okay, so is there anything you wanted to say in terms of the more update part of your report?
No, to be honest, I think probably covered the key messages in terms of timetable. So I'll just have to take any questions if there are any.
Okay, are there any? No? Okay, thanks very much, Andrew. Okay, item 14 is the annual report of the committee. So everything in it ought to be very familiar to the members of the committee because it's about what we've been doing. But if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them. It's been another year, I think, of an effective committee, and you can see that in the government statements actually. That actually, I'm pleased to hear what Peter's had to say as well today. But you know, it does feel to me that what is produced by internal audit and then brought through the committee is taken seriously, and you know, I've not yet had an occasion to think I'm being brushed off when we've had a discussion at the committee, which is very helpful. Does anyone want to raise any questions on our own annual report, or anyone else want to ask any questions on our report? If not, then the final item is the work programme, which contains within it the terms of reference, which we looked at last time and sent out for consultation, and which are back with us unchanged for approval. But just first of all, in terms of the work programme, I think we've already said, actually, this is the work programme as it stands, but it's going to look different next time we sit down. So we take that under advisement. If there's nothing on that, is there anything further on the terms of reference? We do need to adopt them. So are the committee members happy to adopt the revised terms of reference? Everybody's nodding. Thank you very much. Okay, that completes our business. But before we close, I do just want to say to Gemma, thank you for your many years of service here, which have been enjoyed by us all. And we do wish you all the best. Is it Gloucestershire? Gloucestershire that you're going to, so their Alamos is their game, but we wish you all the best. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, that concludes our business. Thank you all very much. I'll turn off the recording, Russell. Thank you.